Remember that kid from school who always seemed to get into trouble? Didn't matter the day, the situation, or the circumstances, they just didn't care much for rules and authority. And no matter how many times they got reprimanded, they never changed, and rarely hesitated to get into more trouble. Well, if you do remember that kid, then chances are we did not go to the same school. In fact, I'm pretty sure that if you went to my current school, you think you'd walk into some weird parallel universe, one where kids never broke the rules, and if they did, they never did it more than once. I know, it might seem impossible, especially if you're a parent to an unruly child. But I promise you, such a school does exist. I know because I went to one, and my experience, for the most part, was typical for most kids who went to that school. But unlike most kids, I know the school's deepest, darkest secrets. And I need to expose those secrets before it's too late. By the time you hear this message, it might already be too late. I'll just have to take that chance. By doing so, I'll be putting myself and everyone I care about at a huge risk. So I'll have to be a bit vague with the details. I can't give you my real name or where I live. I've already legally changed my name and my address, but once you hear my story, you'll understand why. But to appreciate the extent of those secrets, you'll need to know a bit about my background. You see, I come from a fairly rich family. We aren't billionaires or well-known celebrities or anything like that. You'll never see our names in the news, the media, or some reality show. Most of our wealth is generational, going back to my great-great-grandfather, who simply planted the seeds of our fortune when he first came to this country. Later generations just built on top of it. You could say I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, and that would be mostly accurate, but regardless of how you feel about rich people, you'll need to set those sentiments aside for now. Because my family's wealth is largely secondary. The only reason it matters is because that wealth allowed us to attend the famous Grand Horizon School District. Now, before you go Googling that, just be aware that name is likely obsolete. That's what it was called when I was a student, but that's not what it's called now. It changes constantly. It has to because it's not a school district per se. Grand Horizon is more a network than a school district. It's basically this elite collection of schools that only rich, well-connected people can send their kids to. But make no mistake, they are not the fancy prep schools that you're envisioning. Hell, if you walk by them on the street, they would just look like an ordinary school, albeit one that's clean, well-funded, and well-equipped. They largely exist separately from local public schools, but function very differently from most private schools. To the parents, they're pitched as an ideal balance, a school that gives students the best education their money can buy, and an experience that ensures they remain somewhat grounded and unspoiled. And believe me, that is a big problem for rich families, especially ones like mine. Because their second biggest fear, after paying taxes of course, is that their kids will be affected by wealth in all the wrong ways. They'll either become so detached from the real world that they won't be able to function, or they'll become so reckless that they'll squander everything the family has amassed. And that's a perfectly valid concern. Most people have probably heard stories about spoiled, entitled brats pissing away their parents' money, showing off their fancy cars, buying expensive clothes, basically flaunting their wealth in a way that most ordinary people despise or envy. But therein lies the great untold secret of wealthy families. You see, by and large, they hate those kids even more than you do. They hate how they bring unwanted attention to their lavish, lascivious lifestyle. They always have, going back to the days before social media or reality TV shows. That's why they go to such great lengths to educate and mold their children to be upstanding, restrained, and dutiful, at least from the public's perspective. But how do you even go about that? How do you stop young rich kids from using their money to indulge, imbibe, or shirk responsibility at every turn? Well, that's where the Grand Horizon school districts come in. And like any good servant or nanny, they do the job that rich parents don't have the time or energy to do. How they go about that? Well, that's where those secrets I mentioned earlier come in. Like most kids in my tax bracket, I was blissfully unaware of those secrets for much of my youth. From preschool to my second year of high school, I didn't give much thought to how my school went about their business. I just treated it as something I had to do 5 days a week, learning the skills you need to learn to be a functional adult. but I learned at some point that the schools I was going to were a lot nicer than most schools. Less than 15 miles away from my family home, there were grossly underfunded public schools, complete with dirty bathrooms, overworked teachers, and no Olympic-sized swimming pool. But I didn't give much thought to them, at least until high school when I took an interest in education. At some point in my early teens, I got it in me that I wanted to be a teacher. I know that sounds corny, a rich kid wanting to be a teacher, but I'm serious. It became a real passion for me, one that my parents proudly supported, no less. I think they thought it was a noble profession, one that would cast their family in a positive light. But a key part of learning how to teach others involved learning how to discipline students who were unruly. And when I started studying this, well, that's when I started noticing something unusual about the Grand Horizon school districts. Despite having these large, well-equipped facilities full of hundreds of young kids and hormonal teenagers, there didn't seem to be much of a discipline problem. That's not to say nobody ever broke rules. There were occasional incidents like fights in the hall, pranks gone bad, and attitudes towards teachers. But they never happened more than once, and never by the same person. It would usually go something like this. A kid would break a rule, they'd get caught, they'd get sent to the principal's office, and then they'd come back. They didn't look any different, they didn't seem upset or angry, they didn't even make a scene. In fact, they became so well behaved that it was almost unnatural, for lack of a better word. For years, I thought that was normal. I never gave it a second thought. But then, as part of a summer assignment, I looked into how local public schools operated, and I was genuinely surprised by how hard it was to discipline kids. I remember being so dumbfounded when I heard there were these unruly kids who stayed unruly, regardless of how many times they got reprimanded. I'd see a kid in grade school making a scene. The teacher would get so angry, but the kid didn't stop, no matter how many times they got punished. And it only got worse in high school. There, I saw kids flat out attacking authority figures, not caring whenever they got caught or yelled at. And being sent to the principal's office never seemed to help. Sometimes they came back even more rebellious and deviant, as though they didn't care about the consequences of breaking rules. And that really bothered me. I kept wondering, what was Grand Horizon doing that others weren't? And if it worked so well, why didn't other schools do it? I tried to make sense of it. I even asked around about it, consulting my parents, my teachers, and my counselors. Now, my parents didn't really know too much. They were content to just shrug it off because you can't argue with the results of these schools. The teachers and counselors weren't too helpful either. Their response usually boiled down to they just had a unique way of doing things. It just happened to work exceptionally well. I still tried to probe for details, but I never got any. I think I even annoyed a few people by digging into it so much. Eventually, I just stopped asking. I even considered dropping the matter altogether. But I just couldn't fight this gnawing curiosity inside me. I actually lost sleep over it. I didn't have to know the truth to become a good teacher. I guess I just couldn't leave well enough alone. And I cannot overstate how much I hate myself for that. Ultimately, I hatched this plan. Wasn't a very elaborate plan, but it didn't have to be. The hardest part was just waiting for some kid to misbehave enough to get sent to the principal's office. And at Grand Horizon, that was a bit of a challenge. But eventually, it did happen, courtesy of a boy named Cole. I'd give you his last name, but chances are that would just complicate the story even more. But trust me, you don't need to know it in order to appreciate what happens next, or why it was so disturbing. Because Cole was really nothing unique, relative to a community of rich, well-connected people. He always had a bit of a mischievous side. He loved talking back, pulling pranks, and being obnoxious. Just typical teenage rich kid stuff. But he always managed to avoid punishment, not because of anything too remarkable, just because he was careful, cunning, and even a bit lucky. It was really only a matter of time before he eventually got caught. All I had to do was wait. And I didn't end up having to wait too long. While still in his freshman year, Cole got the bright idea to stuff a big stink bomb in the girls' locker room. He even tried to make this crude timer so that it went off after class when most of them were getting changed. Thankfully, he wasn't all that tech savvy. When the stink bomb failed to go off, he tried to sneak in and fix it one morning. But his luck finally ran out. The female gym teacher caught him with the device and the stink bomb in hand. He tried to talk his way out of it, but it was no use. Finally, Cole was going to be punished. Now, I heard about this shortly after I got in that day. Apparently, a bunch of girls started talking about it when the gym teacher told them about the plot, which ultimately led to new locks being placed on the doors. That was where the story ended for everyone else in the school. But for me, this was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. I'd asked around and found out he was still at the principal's office. Now, from a distance, Cole did not look that upset. He just looked annoyed with himself. Not sorry for what he did, just sorry that he got caught. He had the poise and demeanor of a true deviant, a spoiled kid who never faced consequences for his actions. Were he not in the Grand Horizon School District, he would have been a recurring problem, now and probably for years to come. But he was about to face Grand Horizon's unique brand of discipline, and I was going to see for myself what that actually entailed. As for how I went about that, I convinced a few teachers I needed to spend a free period at the library. That gave me the time I needed to sneak off and check on Cole. I also created a distraction for the school security staff. It was nothing destructive, I assure you. It was just something serious enough that it kept their attention for a good 20 to 30 minutes. And once I had that window, I made my way to the main office. I hung back near a few lockers until I saw Cole. Then the principal and a couple of administrators I'd never seen came walking out. But they weren't heading to the main exit or to any classrooms. They were heading down towards this locked area that everyone thought was a utility closet. But as it turns out, it was actually something much different. Once they unlocked those doors, I managed to slip in. Can't say I wasn't scared though. These areas were supposed to be off limits to students. Now I knew if I got caught, I might face a punishment even worse than Cole's. Ironically, I learned how flawed that assumption was, but not for the reasons you think. In the moment though, my curiosity exceeded my fear. After making it through the doors, I found myself in this dark, winding corridor. There were no windows, no classrooms, no offices, not even any bathrooms. It kind of reminded me of a dungeon or a prison, which I found more than a little off-putting, because it did not match the clean, polished image of the school. But it was definitely worse for Cole. Even from a distance, I could hear him starting to protest. "Hey, what is this? Where are you taking me? Answer me! Don't make me call my parents!" He sounded more and more scared with each step they took. I peeked down the corner of a junction. I saw him starting to struggle. But the two administrators held firm, not letting him escape. As they neared the end of the hall, he got even more desperate. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? I'll apologize. I'll stay after school. What do you want from me?" At that point, he had tears in his eyes. I couldn't see them, but I could sense it. Cole knew what was about to happen to him was not normal. And I got this sick feeling in the pit of my stomach that whatever discipline they were about to give him, it was not just detention or extra homework. And once they made it to the end of the hall, they went through this set of double doors. I only got a brief glimpse inside, but it looked kind of like the school nurse's office. There was this examination table in the center and what looked like some sort of storage unit for lab equipment. The doors closed and I heard it lock behind them. But for some reason, these doors had a small gated window in front of them, so I could see inside once I got close enough. I kept looking around me, making sure there was nobody else nearby. Then I carefully and quietly approached the window to the door, my heart pounding harder and harder with dread. I still had no idea what I was about to witness. On some level, I knew it was probably something I was better off not seeing. But, like the curious fool I was, I looked inside. What I saw will be forever etched in my memory. Because there he was, Cole, this spoiled kid who most saw as a harmless prankster, strapped to a table. And he was really scared now, not to mention crying pretty hard. I think he even peed himself. It was hard to tell because of the poor lighting. He kept yelling and yelling at the principal, demanding they let him go. But neither the school principal nor the administrators flinched. They just looked down at him with this stern, cold gaze, Then the principal said something that shook me to my very soul.
You've shown an unacceptable inclination to break rules. For those privileged enough to attend Grand Horizon, this is unacceptable. As such, you must be disciplined.
The way he said that word, discipline, it just hit so much harder. Because this was not discipline in terms of a stern talking to, a slap on the wrist, or a loss of any privilege. He clearly meant it in another way, one unlike anything that had ever been uttered beyond these walls. And that was enough to shut Cole up, who was still trembling with fear. He could only watch as the principal got something out of what I think was some kind of medical fridge. It turned out to be a syringe in some kind of vial, not like what you'd see at a doctor's office when getting a shot. Now, if you're at all weary of needles, you might want to stop here, because I promise you, it gets a lot worse. I keep on watching as the principal fills the syringe halfway with this reddish-brown substance and taps the side. Then, without saying a word, he just walks up to the boy, grabs his arm, and injects whatever's inside that syringe directly into his veins. I can hear Cole groaning through the door. He starts crying again, even as the principal puts a bandage over the injection area. At first, nothing seems to happen. Not with Cole and not with the principal. But then, they step back, but the principal stays close, looking so eerily casual while he throws away the needle. Cole is still tensing and shifting anxiously. He looks just as confused as me, but a lot more scared. Then, the principal explained what he just did. But I truly wish he hadn't.
Relax and breathe deeply. I just injected you with a unique chemical cocktail, something we at New Horizon call total discipline. In less than a minute, you're going to feel pain. Horrible, unceasing, unimaginable pain. Every inch of your skin will feel like it's on fire. Every bone and organ will start to hurt incessantly. It will be the single greatest pain you can possibly imagine, times a million.
The horror in Cole's face defies words. I swear, for however long I live, I'll never forget that look. But it still got worse than that.
This pain will only last for a few minutes. But the cocktail also contains a chemical that affects various parts of the brain that perceive time. So while it'll only be brief from our perspective, for you, it'll feel like you spent a lifetime in a very real form of hell. It'll be so immense that your brain won't be able to fully remember it. But make no mistake, you will remember on some level. It'll haunt your dreams and every moment you spend contemplating more deviance. This is what will keep you from breaking rules in the future. This will ensure you remain the upstanding citizen that New Horizons needs you to be.
Before he even finishes that sentence, the pain began. I watched as Cole's face and body contorted in this horrific agony. He let out this cry that I can never unhear, contorting on the table like he was trying to leap out of his own skin. Then came the screams. The horrible, horrible screams. I imagine the room was soundproofed, but I swear I could still hear it. I could hear him screaming and yelling as though he were on fire, as though he were literally in hell, burning and suffering. All that pain and all that torment, just for a prank? As I watched Cole writhe, I started making connections. If this was New Horizons' approach to discipline, their first and last resort for anyone who broke the rules, well, then it's no wonder everyone eventually fell in line. They had all been subject to this total discipline, as he called it. They had been made to suffer so horribly as punishment, but in a way that left no visible scars, only vague memories. It was like the ultimate conditioning, getting students to associate breaking the rules and norms of New Horizons with the greatest possible agony. So, no matter how mischievous or rebellious they might have been, they never dared act on these inclinations. In my memory, I start recalling things that suddenly took on a far greater meaning. I remember seeing some classmates with this band-aid on their arm. They didn't seem to have any lingering effects. I guess everyone figured it was for a vaccine or a blood sample. But those same kids often seemed more stoic, so to speak. It was as though they'd been hardened by what they'd endured, their brains locking it away just so they could function. And yet they never truly forgot, so it was always there, this lingering experience of horrific pain and agony just for breaking the rules. In that moment, I began picturing all those same kids, screaming and suffering like Cole, laying on that examination table, wanting nothing more than to make it all stop. And all the principal did was just stand there and watch, stern as a statue, as though he'd become numb to it all. He claimed the effect would only last a few minutes, but I swear, it was much longer than that. And when it finally did end, it was just so sudden. In the span of just a few seconds, Cole went from yelling and screaming in horrible agony to just falling silent. He didn't pass out or anything. He just laid there, curled up in a fetal position, his face utterly blank, as though his entire mentality had been broken. Finally, the principal leaned in and offered these parting words.
You're in shock right now. Rest for another 20 minutes. Your brain and body need to process what just happened to you. But it'll pass. You'll even walk out of this room with only a vague recollection of your suffering. But a part of you will still remember. Now that you have been subject to total discipline, the mere thought of breaking rules isn't just unappealing. It's literally unthinkable. Not without going back to the hell that you just came from.
Cole didn't respond. He just laid as still as a corpse, an empty husk of a kid. I made eye contact with him for a very brief moment. Even though he saw me, I don't think he was aware of me. He was just too far gone at that moment. And when I realized that, I finally remembered that I was in a place I was not supposed to be. I was also breaking some very serious rules, and if I got caught, then I might suffer the same fate as Cole. And as soon as that thought crossed my mind, I turned away and ran. I ran faster than I ever thought I could run. And when I made it back into the main hall, I just stood there in a daze, not sure if what I had seen was even real. And while I was trying to catch my breath and stop myself from throwing up, a group of my classmates walked by. I even recognized them. We were actually in the same science class together. One even waved at me and gave me a friendly smile. I managed to wave back, if only to not look like I'd just seen the most horrific thing in my life. But then I saw it. The same kid who was waving at me, he had a bandage on his arm too, in the exact same place as Cole. And at that moment, I lost it. I threw up on the spot, naturally attracting the attention of a nearby teacher. In hindsight, it might have been the best cover I could have hoped for. I already looked off after what I'd seen. So when my parents came to pick me up, they didn't seem too inclined to ask questions. Needless to say, I haven't been back to that school. I won't say how I convinced my parents to send me to some other private school, one I knew was not in the New Horizons school district, but I made it clear I was never going back to that school. I was tempted at first to go to the police, the media, or someone, hoping to expose this horror. Then, the day after I found out, the district changed its name. Cole even transferred to another school within the New Horizons school district. For all I know, his parents changed his name and started over somewhere else, assured he would never break the rules again. To me, this is a clear sign that they knew someone had uncovered the truth about their unique discipline methods. They may or may not have known it was me, but I've been living my life assuming that they do. That's why I've gone to such great lengths to hide my identity. The last thing I want is for them to come after me or my family. I'm still trying to figure out a way to expose the truth, but I'm not even sure it's possible. The people involved are too rich and well-connected, and sadly, the results of their methods speak for themselves. There's a reason why when a spoiled rich kid does something outrageous, it makes the news. At the very least, I can try and warn others. I can try and get the word out to those who think they're in a school run by what had once been New Horizon. To those people, I'll say this. Please, whoever you are, a teacher, a parent, or a student, be careful about how your school approaches discipline. Because when you've seen what I've seen, you've heard what I've heard, you know that no one, and I mean no one, truly deserves a punishment like that.